The problems facing New Zealand's primary sector have been mounting at a rapid pace. So I think it's time for open hearts and open minds.
Well, welcome to Sarah's Country for another week. Yes, it is a short week, of course, following Anzac Day, observed yesterday, of course. With these shorter weeks and, of course, the lockdown, how about a surge in energy across the country of creativity and innovation bursting out of the gates? Here's hoping we do, because, you know, we've got an economy to rebuild, of course. For those of you who have joined Sarah's Country for the first time, welcome. You can be a first-time caller here at Sarah's Country. But in the comments below, wherever you are watching, of course, around the world and on 10 different platforms across the web. I can read them here on my little lippy laptop and live throughout the show. I want your questions for our guests as well as, of course, your comments. So, of course, I'll let you know who those guests are later on. Of course, if you want to suggest somebody for the show, a particular guest, it could be yourself, please get in touch with me by slipping into my message box on social media or email Sarah with an H at perriammedia.com. So I did actually mention there before, rebuilding the economy. We certainly know that it will take us turning ourselves away and refraining from things like fast fashion at Glassons from China, turning our noses up at cheap red wine from Spain, and, oh dear, God forbid, flipping the bird to Best Foods mayo. Yeah, I know, it is very good from the US. Joel, you told me about your trip to Japan before you came here to New Zealand, and they've got some ridiculous products, you know, materialism over the top of stuff you just really don't need.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, my favourite one was a pair of jandals that was like a fish. They were fish flops. They were something else.
Not made out of real fish, but you wouldn't put it past the Japanese, to be fair.
No, they were all plastic, but I wouldn't even want to imagine.
And, of course, they have those weird things where, you know, to get rid of your double chin, those things. And
oh, yeah, just like an entire floor of weird exercise equipment and like face stretching stuff. And it was fascinating. So it was just wandering around.
So it's got me thinking this week. We're heavily on social media, working hard across all of our advertising campaigns, without a doubt. Hashtag back our backyard, buy New Zealand made to rebuild our economy. Yet we are so worried at the same time about our $45 billion worth of exports that transacts overseas in their markets, where their own protectionism of their own patch has risen just like our own. So how do we win? It's not a political situation like a war. It's not an economic situation like the GFC. This is the most major disruption to our globalization we've created of our food systems, and on how interdependent we have become and so vulnerable to this distribution disruption of COVID-19. I've been hearing a lot through our news meetings at Farmers Weekly about how dire it is in the US and the flow-on effect it is having here to us in New Zealand. It's not that they don't have the ability to feed their own people. They simply can't process the crops, the animals, the milk, because the workers in those plants have got sick from COVID. So here's a video that was actually sent in to me just before that I went live from James Hall from Nokamai of a US rancher. Yeah, he actually kind of looks a little bit like James, but he gives us a real raw understanding over the next minute of the situation in the States.
We are in trouble. Our food supply is in trouble, and I am appealing to producers and consumers across the nation to start calling. Yesterday, the first shipment of imported beef from the country of Namibia hit the shores of the United States of America. And yet this morning they are telling us to prepare to euthanize harvest-ready cattle. Am I the only one that sees a problem in this? It is time we get the American people back to work. It is time we get money flowing. It is time we get food on the shelves. Because if you're not concerned about this food supply problem, you better be. We have a huge supply and demand of food across this nation. We can feed the world ourselves, and yet we're destroying our harvests. At the same time, we are importing beef from other countries, beef that is less regulated than our beef, less safe, not as high quality of product, and yet it's happening. At the same time, they are preparing for us to euthanize our harvests.
So on that note, I want to ask you in the comments below, throughout the show, of course, I can keep an eye on your comments here live across all the different platforms. Let's celebrate. What are the coolest New Zealand made products that you think we should be supporting and that you can't get from anywhere around the world that's individually unique? I asked last week about what products define New Zealand internationally. Not talking about that, talking about what are some of the coolest New Zealand products that I can get my hands on to sort of deck out the new house, and of course the yummy foodie products that we make here and only distribute locally in New Zealand. I'm following this awesome group on Facebook. If you're not, it's called New Zealand Made Products. It's got over 200,000 followers, and it's where people can post their unique businesses, and people are really finding out about some unique new ideas and products. I certainly have. I picked up some Chatham Islands blue cod. And I just saw before our winemaker, Dark Shooter's Port, Pinot Noir, it's made out of. So if I can just give it a wee plug. So head over and jump on that page, New Zealand Made Products. Join the group and uncover New Zealand products. Of course, we need to export, but of course, we need to support our own. It's a real fine balance. So, of course, if you've got any of those comments below of these New Zealand businesses, please tag the business as well, so I don't have to go Googling. Coming up on the show, on the theme of the disruptions to our distribution lines in our major export markets, I'm excited to have on the show our new Special Agricultural Trade Envoy, Mel Poulton, on after 7:20. Now, Mel's role sees her heavily involved in our trade negotiations and market access around the globe. She tells me earlier before the show, New Zealand, we got this. So look forward to having Mel after 7:20. And after 7:30, we get an update on our feed levels around the country from Foundation for Arable Research GM for Business Operations, Ivan Lawrie. And of course, he wants to talk about how to correctly feed grain to sheep. Well, councils are coming under fire to either freeze or reduce rates and up the ante on lending, to double down on lending that will boost our regional economy with infrastructure spending. We are joined tonight towards the end of the show by President for Local Government New Zealand, Dave Cull. And we all hear how it's not actually that straightforward. So, of course, it goes to our poll tonight over on the Farmers Weekly Facebook page. Local government is in a predicament between staying elected, of course, and growing the regional economy post-COVID-19. What do you think they should do? Freeze rates, borrow more, or increase rates and borrow less? Short-term versus long-term minded thinking a little bit. We all know how underfunded our regional infrastructure is. So far, the results over here on Farmers Weekly are 70% freeze rates. Not surprising, borrow more, and of course 30% increase rates and borrow less. So that tells you a thing or two, not only about the times, but also about the role that we put on our councils taking rates versus our central government taking our tax. But first up on Serious Country, with all of that, is, of course, our own individual, what is in our own individual control, which is, of course, our well-being and our well-being of our Kiwis, to me, is first and foremost the most important thing. I'm really looking forward to this interview with National Party's Matt Doocey on the concept of teaching all New Zealanders the concept of psychological first aid. You know, when you want to help someone with depression or anxiety, but you don't have the tools to do so. We're going to catch up with Matt after this video from Dairy Women's Network, of course, ahead of next week's Fonterra Dairy Woman of the Year.
This is Serious Country.
people in Auckland, they sort of wonder, what's my why? Why am I doing this? It's not very typical of a, city girl. They sort of think, what's the reason? It's Auckland. It's just me and obviously central Auckland, which is a bit crazy for me to be into agriculture, I guess.
In 1932, the farm was purchased by ASB from the Kerr-Taylor family, which is quite an influential family in Auckland. They saw the need for rural education in urban scenarios.
So I've got my agricultural and horticultural sciences class and my agribusiness class. I'm just looking out the window, I can see Peter doing work on the farm. Sometimes we contemplate getting our books, writing a little sign and putting up going, "Get us out, Peter, let us help you." With this one, I'm just gonna push in the pressure gauge and when I'm ready to put the cups on. So in the mornings, I work here sometimes as a part-time farmhand. So I do the milking in the morning and feeding the lambs and stuff like that. This is the newest addition to our milking herd. Just a new heifer. She's only just had her first calf. I think it's just very different to what I'm used to or what anyone in Auckland is used to. It's just great to get outside. This one here, Chocolate, she's very cheeky. She likes to think she runs the place. For girls, it is really cool, and especially because we have such great female teachers who get us into it as well. So I think she's done now. Even though it's early sometimes, but you find that once you're out there and you're getting ready and it sort of just motivates you for the day. So hungry, I know.
We're connecting kids with the opportunities that the agri-food and fibre sector has, milking dairy cows, shearing sheep, pruning vines, whatever it might be.
They really haven't grasped the concept yet. One's just going underneath, oh my gosh.
8 hectares in the middle of Auckland, 260 ag and agribusiness kids, which we've grown from 180 18 months ago.
The calves are drinking from the cafeteria, so they're drinking the milk that's come from our milking herd. They're very hungry and they love it. Yeah.
These kids are really good. They're really keen to learn.
All this plant is all full of milk, so we might have to flood the plant to clean that old milk out.
Okay.
Over the last 18 months we've been developing it. Started with new grass. We've had guys testing sensors and things for water quality, plantings from 2,000 plus native trees which are all grown on farm in our native tree nursery. We have plans to construct an agri-food and fibre experience centre, which would be a central hub for agribusiness in Auckland.
When I'm here, I don't feel like I'm at school. I feel like even though I'm learning so much while I'm doing it, it's more or less just something that I'd love to do anyways. It's cute because after they've all finished, they have milk beds. Very hungry today. I was putting up some fences in the top paddock and I just looked out and I just see the Sky Tower and all of the buildings, and it was just sort of like a moment of whoa, this is real. It's just our little slice of New Zealand right in the city, which is really awesome to have.
It's a unique opportunity here.
After school, I definitely want to do something in agriculture. It's just a great community to be in, the ASB Mags Farm community.
Good to see. We've got a good turnout, of course, back at the start of the week. Well, it's Tuesday, but you know what I mean. Tony Watson, thank you. Yeah, no, totally right, Tony. It said it's a reality check from the US rancher there before. Just another reason to keep our meat workers and producers safe, of course, so that we can continue to export overseas. And good to see Katrina McMillan is here. Yeah, handcrafted sheep milk soap. It is absolutely gorgeous, made just down the road here at Lonesdale. Give them a like and follow on Instagram. They're great, Lonesdale Sheep Dairy. So, of course, the reason we're talking tonight is what is some of those great New Zealand-made products that you've gotten behind this week when we're, backing our backyard and backing and getting behind buying some of our nice New Zealand-made products rather than this cheap, nasty stuff from China, of course. And give us a wee heart emoji if you are loving Sarah's Country. We would really love you to share what we're doing. If you love it and you think that other people should be watching this, 7 o'clock, Monday through Thursday, across all the platforms, but of course on social media, on Sarah Perriam's page and Farmers Weekly. Give us a bit of love. If you're loving what we're doing, of course. You should never assume. Now, psychological first aid training is currently delivered face-to-face by St John's and Red Cross, but could be easily adapted to online. This has the potential to be an important first line of defence in addressing the growing mental and emotional distress in New Zealand we all know that we have, and of course rising as a result of the impacts of COVID-19, as our next guest is proposing to push forward on. National Party spokesman for mental health, Matt Doocey, from, of course, our neck of the woods, MP for Waimakariri, joins us now. Good evening, Matt.
Good evening, Sarah. Hey, thanks for allowing me to be on your show. I feel a bit like first-time caller, so you'll have to be gentle with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I won't Marcus Lush you if anyone listens to him at night. I feel he's a bit rude, throws people under the bus. Now, firstly, Matt, Canterbury is one innovative place. We're just going to jump and continue on this theme here of New Zealand-made products before we get into that topic. What's a homegrown special for you that you think that we should all throw our support behind? I know you can't. You politicians like to be all things to all people, but give a shout out to something you like, especially from Canterbury.
Well, look, we are highly innovative. We are world leaders. That's why we are the best rugby region in the world, of course. But, you can't beat some of the varietals of wine that are coming out not far from me in the Waipara region. And it's amazing. I'm backing a new cycleway from Christchurch to Waipara, the Wheels of Waipara, so people can head out and enjoy those vineyards. There's something special out that way.
Can I just say that heading back, and we might need to be on e-bikes just so that it can take over. There's a huge amount of great wineries, and Black Estate is definitely one of mine. Now, the reason we have got Matt on the show is certainly not to talk about Waipara wines. It's to talk about this concept. Matt, I've been involved in the rural mental health space for some time. The concept of psychological first aid is actually new to me, and that's hence why I jumped on the press release when it come through. Can you please give an understanding of what has already been happening on our front line, as we see Red Cross and St John's?
Sure. Well, I mean, as we know, Canterbury and Greater Christchurch post-earthquakes, we know about mental health. We've learned a lot about it, and we've learned of the necessity for ourselves to understand more and more about how we respond to not only ourselves but other people's mental distress. And what we do know, in fact, there was a recent article in the Lancet magazine that was published to say that based on other outbreaks such as SARS and Ebola and H1N1, we know that when we have isolation, the fear of infectious disease, that generates high rates of mental distress amongst our communities. So many of your watchers and listeners will know about the concept of first aid, the physical first aid, but that's transferred now to psychological first aid. And what that does is it allows us to learn an understanding of how we learn about mental health and distress, but also look for the signs and the symptoms and how to support someone who's displaying them. And my proposition that if we were to roll out free psychological first aid, then we could learn those signs and symptoms to how we support our friends, our families, our neighbours, our work colleagues in what is a difficult time ahead of us.
Matt, that's certainly one of my biggest takings from the Will to Live national tour that we did last year with my sister Ellie, and is the fact of the questions coming in as people like John Kerwin and Doug Avery have done great work in the space of making us aware that it's okay to not feel okay, but the next step seems to be, I don't know how to help somebody who's struggling. We're not sharing those tools. What would you like to see publicly funded for free that educates New Zealanders on how to help people?
Yeah, well, that's why I'm calling for the psychological first aid, because I think this is an important first step, almost a front line. But what we also have to look at is the different variations of how it's delivered. I mean, you mentioned the great work that you've achieved and are doing in the Will to Live, and that is about rural communities coming together. Farming and rural people want to talk to other farming and rural people, so we can skill up our rural support trusts and other people to make sure that those skills and the knowledge is transferred to other people in the communities. Another way for bigger cities and metropolitan areas will be providing the psychological first aid training online. So people can go on, they can access it, and they can teach themselves.
Well, that's the big thing, right? So we're looking here at $455 million out of last year's budget. You're saying $3.2 million has been spent to date. But it takes 9 years to train a psychologist. And we just can't speed it up like by pouring it into an outdated system. How do you believe, should National be elected in the election, you can actually speed that up, that spend up into the right places?
Yeah, well, a lot of this is unfortunately slowed down because everything gets centralised. I think what we should do is have a high trust model where we make sure we put money into community services where local people can decide what's the best use of that money. For instance, when we look at rural communities, part of my electorate, Waimakariri, is a rural community. Rural people want to talk to other rural people about mental health. Still now, many of the male farmers will still get their wife to ring up and make the GP appointment. And so that's why programs like Farm Strong, when they skilled up milk tanker drivers to go on into the farms and to help and identify mental health issues, that's the sort of stuff we need to do. And of course, we could provide this free online psychological first aid training for people who have access to high-functioning broadband, which is not always everyone in New Zealand.
No, thank you so much for taking the time. That's Matt Doocey, MP for Waimakariri for National, and of course the spokesman for National in terms of mental health. Now, Matt, before you go, I've just caught my eye here. Obviously from Canterbury. Feely's not, so of course Canterbury. Do you like a good Feely pie?
I do. I love a very good pie. Not only Feely's good for their pies, but as a young fella, I used to do an annual pilgrimage down to the Feely A&P show, and that was a good time as well. Absolute
cracker, Mackenzie A&P show. It's always Easter Monday. Fantastic day out. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, Matt Doocey there. Now, of course, if you want to watch Sarah's Country on demand, you can't catch us between 7 and 8 live. That's okay. It's many people's dinner time, we understand. We are, of course, on demand, both video and podcast. So head to Sarah's Country wherever you listen to your podcast and give us a big old subscribe if you can. And then it can download overnight using your Wi-Fi, as well as, of course, on YouTube, Farmers Weekly. Go there to the YouTube channel, watch anything back. And, of course, you can actually listen to us live. The best way is go to sarahperriam.com, click on live, and you'll be able to listen live to the show, whether you're in a tractor or as someone was carting grapes the other day listening to us. Now, next on Sarah's Country, we're going to head to the Hawke's Bay to discuss trade with Mel Poulton. So I want your questions in the comments below for her.
This is Sarah's Country.
Dear New Zealand.
We know things are really tough out there right now.
People are concerned about their health and the health of their loved ones.
People are worried about the economy and when will things get back to normal.
Believe me when I say, us farmers are feeling it too. But now's no time to panic.
Our country can get through this together.
We just need to follow instructions and stay home.
Inside our bubble.
Let's flatten this curve and stop this disease spreading.
Together! You don't need to worry about supermarkets getting low on food. There's plenty to go around for
everyone!
All the countries that could run out of food, New Zealand is not one of them.
Our farmers are world leading.
And we're damn good at what we do, producing high quality food.
We have strong supply lines.
And we're all working hard to keep food on the table.
For your family
And for ours.
New Zealand dairy farmers produce enough for 100 million people.
You're in good hands, New Zealand.
You can count on us to keep calm and carry on farming.
We're trusting you to stay at home to keep our country safe.
We are following the rules too.
We can do this.
We're all in this together.
Cheers, New Zealand.
Delicious. Ever wondered where it starts? Does it start with care? Respect. Fresh grass 365 days a year. The truth is, delicious doesn't start in a single moment or with a single ingredient. Delicious starts here.
One of the first things you learn when you live out here
is where to shop for the things you need to live out here.
like electric fencing,
Or horse feed.
or bee suits.
Children. Chook food.
Do you want a couple of these?
Or something stylish to wear. Not everyone's got stuff like this.
But at Farmlands we do, and then some.
So if you need anything to help you farm,
Grow, milk, drench,
rear! Come on in.
because we're out here too.
Okay, so on Sarah's Country tonight, if you've just joined us, we're talking about New Zealand-made products that we should throw our support behind and very in time with our next guest around globalisation, trade protectionism and what's happening around the world. Just going down here to the comments, thank you so much for being an active crowd tonight. Applebee's ice cream is unbelievably good. I 100% agree with you. Having a bit of a sore tummy, made out of A2 milk Applebee's, and it has some pretty naughty, kinky little names for their products too, which I always like. Kate Taylor, High Country Salmon. Every time I go past Twizel, Kate, I get myself a big, full High Country Salmon, and absolutely gorgeous. Keep the comments running in. I want to know what are the New Zealand made products we should get behind in this hashtag back your backyard. They don't have to be food products either. You know, we've got some fabulous fibre products in this country, as well as, of course, businesses, experiences, accommodation, etc. Please tag some of the things we should be celebrating. Now, pre-COVID, we were closely following our EU and UK post-Brexit free trade agreements. Joel, that's just that word, Brexit. UK people are feeling, enjoying a bit of a break.
I honestly
shouldn't say that lightly.
I forgot it was happening, to be honest, which is quite nice for once.
Did you hear about the Brexit free channel they had in the UK?
The
Brexit free channel, because people are so sick of Brexit news.
Yeah, I don't blame them.
Tune in. Now, New Zealand is, of course, a small trading nation at the bottom of the world with a population of 5 million, yet we can feed 50 million. That is, access, of course, to our international markets is something we fight tightly for on a global stage. And as I always say, our trade negotiators, in my mind, should be on the same pedestals as the All Blacks. The successor to the great work Mike Peterson has done is, of course, Mel Poulton, and joins us now. Good evening, Mel.
Good evening, Sarah. How are you?
Good. It's been a pleasure to finally get you on the show, because, I mean, how long's it been since you've taken over Mike's reins?
Well, the job officially started on 1 January, but most people were on holiday for that month, and then we just started getting into things, and then COVID happened. So, yeah, I feel like we've had a bit of a stop-start. But anyway, we work with it.
I was just going to say, you'd be feeling a bit frustrated at the moment that you can't be present in our markets around the world. Where were you?
I was supposed to be in Australia this month, and America and Canada next month, and that's being pushed pause. So that doesn't mean to say that we can't do a whole lot of work anyway. So it's just not necessarily person to person. So we're tapping away on things.
What's happened with our EU and UK trade deals? Has everything just completely gone to a halt? Because, I mean, we can't lose sight of what's going on there. They're very important to us.
they are certainly very important to us. And no, it hasn't halted at all. COVID certainly put a bit of challenge in the mix, and the negotiators haven't been able to necessarily negotiate face to face in the same room with each other. But recently they did have a meeting where they were talking through one of the next rounds. So things are still progressing there, but it's slow going, and people are doing the best that they can with the situation that the world is facing, and we just can't get away from how significant this COVID outbreak has been across the globe.
Mel, we played earlier in the show, and I'm sure you didn't hear because I know you've told me before you're an avid podcast on demand Sarah's Country listener due to some internet situations there in Tararua. But we played a video that was sent to me from a US rancher really explaining how tough the situation is for them on the ground, not being able to process any crops, animals, dumping milk, the whole lot, yet meat from Namibia is surfacing on their shelves and filling that gap. Can you give an understanding, a raw understanding of what it's really like in the US when processors get workers with the virus?
Look, the US is facing a situation that they've never experienced before amongst the processing industry there in all meat processing, so be it pork, chicken, or pork or poultry, because that could also include turkey, as well as beef, and even there's a lamb plant there that we see has been impacted, and it is really, really significant. Some of these CEOs of big companies like JBS, Cargill and Smithfield are saying, warning that, they're facing a situation that they've never faced before, and they are worried about meat supply getting into US supermarkets. So from what I'm reading, it's a pretty serious situation. That said, there are hundreds of meat processors in the US, and according to my tallies, I've got over 75 that are facing impacts from COVID-19 where staff are impacted or testing positive, and there are a lot of plants over there that are, even though they've had staff testing positive and putting them on quarantine, the plants are still remaining operational. There are a number of plants that have closed, some of which have closed indefinitely, and some have closed only for a 2-week period, and some have closed only for a few days. So now we're seeing some of those plants that were closed for a 2-week period coming back on stream, but there are a number of plants over there that have been closed indefinitely, and some of these are major processing plants with well over 2,000 or 3,000 workers. So it's pretty significant.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about patch protection on the show, not only tonight but ongoing. What opportunities does that leave for New Zealand, and where does the consumer sort of view us, I suppose?
I think New Zealand is in a really great space. We've just got to honour the people right across the industry, and as you said before, our trade negotiators need to be up there like our All Blacks are, and I totally agree. We've got some fantastic people working in our ministries, and both MPI and MFAT, and around the world in our with our diplomatic posts, all just doing a tremendous job, and really, really working hard on behalf of New Zealand. But we can't they're just one part. You've got to go right through the whole system here in New Zealand and think about the science and education support to the industry. And research. You've got to think about all of the service providers, be they in the banking system, be they our farm retailers or our seed merchants, or our distribution channels, all our local trucking firms. There's just so many people right across New Zealand that make our whole primary industry really thrive, and we've got to celebrate them. And not to mention our food processors here in New Zealand as well, who have been absolutely working extraordinarily hard to really help New Zealand navigate its way through this COVID outbreak here in New Zealand. So all of that is built on the legacy of the past, and they've created a really great platform for New Zealand to be in right now, and we've got to we've got an opportunity to seize the moment and think about how we navigate our way through this at a global level, at an international market level. And I really think that New Zealand's well placed because we're small, we're nimble, we have flexibility, we've got numerous markets around the world. Just in the meat industry alone, over 120 different markets around the world. And so everybody talks about, our reliance on China. Sure, we've had a big reliance on China, and that's helped us through a lot of tough times, including the GFC. But even with this COVID outbreak, we've seen our exporting companies being able to adapt and move product to different markets to be able to respond to what's going on. And that's given us, the ability to be nimble and flexible has enabled us to keep product flowing. And, even the likes of Zespri right now, they're seeing no real hold-ups at all on any of their exports, even through the distribution line. But in the US, as we were talking before, with their meat processors and the whole meat industry over there facing some significant challenges, they've had to really adapt right throughout the whole sector from logistics and distribution to reconfigure how they move food around the country. And, that shift from food service to supermarket retail has been major. And when you've got this clogging system happening in the meat processing plants over there, that's building up into the cold stores, which, can create some challenges for New Zealand. That said, we haven't had any absolute stop yet. Product is still moving through, but it has been, going a little bit slower and a little bit more technical challenges to actually getting it through. But that's really just a staffing issue and having, those whole systems over there having to reconfigure themselves.
Thank you so much, Mel. That's an absolutely fantastic update on where we're at. And, of course, hitting the straps as soon as you can, I'm sure, to get overseas and take up the post of your special agricultural trade envoy role. Mel, just before you go, though, we're celebrating New Zealand-made products. What's one of yours that you'd like to give a plug to?
Well, I have to plug our local Tararua businesses. So mine is Norswear, and right now I've got my Norswear socks on, and they're keeping my toes nice and toasty pie warm. So got to support our local businesses for sure.
Oh, 100%. Absolute massive fan of Norswear. Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's Mel Poulton joining us here on Ceres Country. And a bit of an update on our poll. If you've just joined us, our poll on Farmers Weekly. We're talking later in the show to Dave Cull, President of Local Government New Zealand. They are in a bit of a predicament. Don't raise rates. Stay elected. Yet there is this gaping hole in our regional infrastructure, and Cameron Baggery is suggesting that they tap into the loan book that they're sitting on. 70% of you say no, freeze rates, borrow more, and 30% sitting still on increased rates and borrow less. So is this a central government issue? I would love to know in the comments below. Do you think that local government have not been supported nationally for a long, long time? What is it? Why is it that we want to ensure that our regional rates stay the same? Bit of conversation going on below. Of course, tag us your New Zealand-made products. Now, coming up after the break, we're going to hear from Foundation for Arable Research's Ivan Lawrie on the feed situation around the country. It's pretty doom and gloom, but of course we want to make up with those of you who are sitting on feed and what to do and what not to do when feeding grain to sheep.
This is Ceres Country.
Great video there from the good team at Global HQ, of course, making it possible to bring you Cirrus Country. Thank you so much to the team there and the news department. I tell you what, 26 reporters and analysts, most experienced across the board at Farmers Weekly, that support me with these amazing guests and amazing stories and topics that we talk about every night, Monday through Thursday from 7 o'clock on Cirrus Country. Now, you know something that's really been grinding my gears? I understand the money going in and to drought spending around farm advisors being able to pump funds into them to help support feed budgeting. Yet it seems like it's a little bit, if you don't have any feed, it's telling a farmer how to suck eggs, and effal is still effal when you don't have anything. There's feed pinches, of course, Hawke's Bay and across many parts of the North Island, but of course Southland is another major problem with crops not striking from those recent floods. But there is feed surplus in regions, and we don't seem to yet have the funds to truck it to these deficits, and that is the bit that really grinds my gears. I want your thoughts and comments below. Of course, questions for Ivan and comments below on this feed situation and how we can help support it and improve it. Ivan has had a bit of a ring round the traps today and to update us on the situation. And Ivan Lawrie is the General Manager, as I was saying before, the business operations at FAR, and joins us now on Cirrus Country. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Sarah. Yes, as I was listening to some of your previous speakers tonight, we are going through some very, very strange times, coupled with some very extreme weather events throughout this country. I don't want to dwell on the doom and gloom scenario. I think that periodically New Zealand hits these periods of drought in certain regions, and that it is in certain ways about how we plan and how we mitigate risk and how we can learn from some of these things. So yes, I've been talking to some people within the industry today, farmers, grain growers, grain traders in regions. I guess demand in general for grains has been steady in the recent months. Probably, I'm not sure how well aware the livestock sector is around the grain supply in New Zealand, but certainly Hello.
Yes, I'm here.
Yep.
I was listening I was listening tentatively.
We've got the internet communication blues sometimes. So basically, I think what we need to do is get some good communication going, get livestock farmers who are in need for supplementary feed at this stage to get in touch with their local reps, their regional reps who understand the markets and who can put farmers together and join supply with demand. What I'm encouraged by saying is that whilst we feel empathy with the areas that have been really badly stricken, most of the arable regions this year had a really good harvest. The supply of grain is there, it's strong, it's much better than it was last year, and that we really just need to get over some of our infrastructure and logistics problems to get the grain to the right place at the right time.
What do you think, Ivan's going to be able to support those logistics? Because that seems to be the real bottleneck to get the feed where it's needed.
So, as I say, I think giving your local traders a real understanding of where that demand needs to go is important, so that packets of grain can be put together in a way that transport becomes more efficient. We are well aware of the costs, of the high costs of moving grain from Canterbury to a drought-stricken area like might be the eastern North Island at this stage. It is not easy to get grain there at a low cost, but we're working on it. The industry as a whole is working on not only for feed grains, but how can we get our milling grains up there? Because a situation like this only highlights the dependence that we have had a lot on imports, And at times like these, people really start thinking about how important it is to have a local supply of grain.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just visualizing this big tunnel that we can build. That's a big grain tunnel. Because, of course, like you said, with regards to milling wheat, in South Island, bread is made out of South Island wheat, but in the North Island, of course, heavily imported wheat, let alone our feed grain. Now, talking feeding grain, particularly to sheep, a lot of do's and don'ts. Could you run through those?
A lot of do's and don'ts. I think, first and foremost, I'm not a nutritionist or a veterinarian to give advice directly to farmers. So our first advice from far is get in touch with a professional who can give you some sound advice on how to feed grains, because it's not always that straightforward. It needs to be a gradual process, and the rumen needs to get used to a change in diet gradually. But what we do know is that grains are an efficient way of getting high energy to animals in times of need, and that this can be stored and it can be moved reasonably well from different regions in the country. So it is an alternative that is valid. The other thing we do know from recent studies is that there are some environmental benefits in matching high energy grains with protein-based feed from grass. And getting that balanced diet is actually a means to reduce nitrate leaching. So these are benefits that we see, and I think there's some excellent resources on both the beef and lamb websites and Dairy NZ websites on how to feed grains to animals safely and efficiently, but always with the advice of a professional.
Yeah, of course. I suppose it's like any feed, and being able to neutralise the acid in the rumen and that fear of acidosis when you've got, being able to have a bit of roughage with a bit of straw mixed up. But I, like you said, the safest grains, firstly is oats, then barley, and then, of course, wheat after that. A mixed diet.
And that's a factor of the nature of the grains, because barley and oats, of course, are hulled and have a high fibre in their covers, whereas wheat is a naked grain, so it's more dangerous in terms of producing acidosis in the rumen. But all grains can be used, and as I say, with safe advice, can be used wisely. I guess the scenario at the moment is of great uncertainty for all sectors, but what we're saying, and this is certainly the message I got very clearly today from the different regions, was plan ahead for next season. Make sure that you've got some conversations in place with your suppliers so that you don't get caught out in spring with a lack of supplementary feed, because at the moment, as I say, demand is very steady, and we've got to make sure that the feed gets to the right place at the right time, and that conversation's had early.
Absolutely. It's not just the winter, it's going on for far longer than that. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Ceres Country. General Manager for Business Operations, that's Ivan Lawrie. Now, of course, we've got some great comments still coming in here. Waipawa Butchery's beef sausages. A friend of mine actually signed up to ordering the Waipawa Butchery online. It's amazing how many things are going online that you can literally get your hands at now. Not having to worry about going and calling in. And I was thinking about it while I was listening to the radio, all this click and collect. I really hope continues on top of course, opening traditional retail as we go into, hopefully, at level 2. Now, of course, we've got our poll results. I'm going to quickly change. Oh, they've just only slightly moved back. 68% of you saying freeze rates and borrow more. Of course, that is ahead of our next interview on Ceres Country, the last for the show. Dave Cull, President of Local Government New Zealand.
This is Ceres Country.
Every morning, Kiwi farmers wake up to produce high quality food. Yet, every night, some Kiwi families are going to sleep hungry. Meet the Need is a charity founded by farmers, and it's here to change all that. We're about New Zealand farmers feeding New Zealand families by donating a small part of what we grow when we can. You can help us make sure no one in New Zealand goes to sleep hungry again. Visit meettheneed.org and follow us on social.
Even when everything changes, some things will always stay the same. The cows still need milking, the economy still needs dairy, and dairy farmers will always have what it takes. Whatever you need to keep milking, our job during the lockdown is to get it to you, because we know what it takes.
Well, those of you who
This
were
is
watching or
Sarah's
listening to
Country.
Sarah's Country a couple of weeks back would have heard Cameron Bagri's very strong opinion around local government's ability to fund local and regional infrastructure to, of course, rebuild New Zealand post-COVID-19. So I've taken the opportunity to go to local government and go direct to President Dave Cull, who is, of course, former Dunedin Mayor and joins us now. Dave, of course, we've known each other being in my local area of Otago and Dunedin. I know that you've got a great batch in Terrace. Have you enjoyed isolation there?
Yes, I did, and I haven't been up there for, obviously, the whole lockdown period. I've been back here in Dunedin, so...
It's a great spot.
This is where my veggie garden is.
Yeah, absolutely, and great spot to get out on the bike as well, I'm sure.
Right, yes, indeed.
Dave, you're a very busy man, so thank you for taking the time to join us. But, of course, there's been a lot of media pressure lately about do we raise or freeze rates in a terrible economic time with a lot of rising unemployment, the highest in what it's going to be since the early 90s. And it's not, of course, that straightforward to be able to just go out and loan. So my first question, I suppose, to you is what is the challenges in balancing, of course, rate rises versus lending for infrastructure?
Well, I guess we need to be thinking about the position that councils are in and what councils are there for. And councils are there to create services and infrastructure to support their communities. And the things that were needed prior to the COVID crisis are still there. So the water pipes or the wastewater pipes or whatever under some city streets that are need of a renewal, they still need renewing. The work that needs to be done to mitigate flood risks from climate change, etc., they still need to be done. And so the responsibilities of councils haven't gone away. And in fact, there's an increased expectation on councils that they'll be part of the economic recovery, that they will need to keep investing in infrastructure that's needed and improvement of their communities. But at the same time, their ratepayers have got a reduced ability to pay their rates because, as you say, so many of them are likely to be unemployed, etc. And other forms of council funding have actually dried up. So about, on average, 40% of council funding comes from non-rates sources. So parking fees, facilities entry fees, perhaps council-owned company dividends, etc. Most of those through the COVID period have disappeared. So councils have actually got really reduced funding, but they still need to be able to invest in the essential infrastructure and in the economic recovery projects that the government has been putting up. So a lot of councils are really wrestling with this issue of we know what we need to do, how are we going to find the funding to do it? So a good number of them have put forward proposals to Crown Infrastructure Partners for shovel-ready projects that could be put in place, pretty quickly. But they will need, I warn, co-investment. The government's not going to give them all the money. Councils have to put some in as well. So that's the position that a good many councils are in.
Is this just actually a sign of the times of how heavily weighted on local councils? A lot of expectation of infrastructure was unfairly weighted to the rating base. I think particularly of places that was heavily under pressure from tourism, like Tekapo and Queenstown.
Yeah, look, there's the proportion of GDP, if you like, that goes to councils has stayed pretty much the same for 100 years. It's about 5%. But the proportion of government funding, GDP that goes to government funding, has risen from about 20 to 30% in the same period of time. So yes, there have been greater demands on local government, and it's a very rating, which is about 60% of council funding, is a very narrow base. And on top of that, over time, central government has imposed what we call unfunded mandates on local government. In other words, they've given them jobs to do, given local government responsibilities, but they haven't given them the corresponding funding lines to pay for it. So I remember talking to a small district mayor a little while ago, and she told me that over several years, the increase in rates, 3% of their rates increase, was down to more responsibilities, unfunded mandates from central government. And that was before inflation, before anything else. So yes, it is an issue.
And of course, RMA reforms are constantly on the table from a central government level and political football. But even more so now as infrastructure wants to get to shovel ready. In particular, Dave, I'd like to address some of the regional infrastructure that, of course, our audience here in Serious Country really want to focus on, being able to get these things finally across the line. So it not only brings, the ability for important things like water storage and irrigation to these areas, but of course, further employment and economic benefit.
Yeah, and they are hugely important to both our economic well-being and our environmental well-being, and some of those are really important in terms of our adaptation to climate change effects. So these are issues, as I said earlier, that were there before COVID. They're still there. We still need to confront them, and we still need to be spending to address them.
Okay, Dave, so tonight on Serious Country, we're running a poll, just probably a little bit more to highlight the fact that it's not so straightforward, because it's very much a hard situation. And you've been in Mayor several different terms. How to balance those promises of the lolly scramble around rates similar to taxes, yet at the same time have the funds and ability to get on and do so. So our poll tonight is around, how do we either freeze or reduce rates, or do we choose to lend? And what do you think the right mix is going to be, as well as, of course, central government support?
Right. Well, for a start, there'll be some councils who have the capacity and the headroom to borrow, to take on debt, rather than put up their rates. But interestingly, some of the big growth councils, like Hamilton, Tauranga, Auckland, have reached their debt ceiling because they've already had to spend an enormous amount on rolling out infrastructure. You don't get new housing developments until you put the infrastructure in the ground. That costs squillions before you even get a house built, but you've got to spend it ahead. So some councils won't be able to borrow. Some other councils will be able to borrow. And I think in some ways that's a fairer thing for their community, because you either pay your rates up front and raise extra money by increasing your rates, or you borrow and it gets paid for over a longer period of time. And that's pretty fair, because successive generations benefit from that. So successive generations contribute to repaying the debt. So in some cases, it's viable for communities to borrow. And there's often a lot of resistance from communities to their councils borrowing and taking on debt. But it's not that much different from having a mortgage. Not many people can afford to pay for a house with cash, and no more than communities can afford to put essential infrastructure that keeps them safe in the case of drinking water and wastewater disposal by just paying cash for it. So you borrow.
Dave, lastly, your opinion, do you think as Kiwis we need to seriously start being more long-term minded?
I think we do, and I think the other thing we need to understand is that if you want services and infrastructure in your community, it has to be paid for. The idea that the less tax you pay, the happier you'll be, is a myth.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us as President of the Local Government New Zealand, Mr. David Cull, of course, former Mayor of Dunedin. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Well, that's all we've got time for tonight. If you have missed any of the previous interviews on tonight or on any of the previous shows, of course you can catch them on demand on Sarah's Country podcast, as well as, of course, Farmers Weekly's YouTube channel. You can always, of course, flick us through suggestions of guests you want to hear from, Sarah at perriammedia.com, or, of course, jump into the old message box on wherever, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it, and let us know who you want to hear from. So tonight, I want to say good night, go well, and remember that where there's a will,